No, no, no. Don't come and tell me that state capture only started 10 years ago. State capture started many decades and centuries ago in South Africa. And the current State Capture Commission is not giving us a full picture.
No, Carl. If you agree to do wrong, you're also corrupt. You can't play victim and say, "Oh, this so and so person corrupted me." You are corrupt because you also benefit. There are many whistleblowers who refuse to be corrupted or to be part of the corruption responsibility partnerships. Surely.
Are you going to give me a chance?
Of course. I'm sorry. I'm getting excited, Carl.
No, it's fine. He says to the other comrades, "We've got a serious problem. Something horrible has happened to Govan. Govan has aged overnight. He's grey, man."
So, welcome. Yes, hello everybody. My name is Solim Weng. Welcome to WorldView, the #1 media company where we explore everyone's perspectives on things that can broaden our own worldview. Today we have Carl Niehaus. You can call him Comrade Carl Niehaus, Ambassador Carl Niehaus, Mr. Carl Niehaus, Mr. Niehaus, or just Carl. I don't know what you want me to call you, Carl. Ambassador Niehaus or just Carl?
Sorry, please do me a favor and just call me Carl, as everyone do.
Great. Hi, Carl. I'm so delighted to be speaking to you. The last time you and I spoke was years ago. Yeah, I think at the time you were spokesperson for the ANC, and I was president of the French South Africa Chamber of Commerce down in Cape Town. We had a wonderful luncheon at which you spoke. You came with your wonderful wife at the time. It all went very well. I shared some pictures with you recently. But anyway, so Carl, we live in a world.
You actually had to jog my memory, Solly. I didn't recall it immediately, but of course, when you sent me those pictures, it all came flooding back.
Yes.
And as you quite correctly say, we had a lovely time that day.
Yeah, we did, definitely. And you spoke very well, as you always do. But, Carl, we live in a world where attention spans are really, really short. People don't read long things anymore, and especially long lives. You have been an anti-apartheid struggle person. You have been in prison for your views on apartheid. You've been South Africa's ambassador to the Netherlands. You have been spokesperson to both Nelson Mandela and to the African National Congress. You've done all of these things. I don't think a lot of young people understand or know those things. They don't have the time to read. So maybe let's imagine that you and I are on the ground one, or on the ground level, and about to take an elevator to the 20th floor, a lift. And I'm giving you an opportunity to do that elevator pitch. Who is Carl? What do you want to be known for and to be associated with?
Solly, I would love to be known as someone who took very difficult decisions very early on in my life, when I was a youngster from 16 years old, and eventually at 19 decided to join the African National Congress, to join the liberation struggle. And of course, that led to a number of consequences for me in my private and my personal life, but also in my public life. It led to my own Afrikaner family, to a very large extent, rejecting me. It led to a participation in the ANC's liberation struggle, and also in the armed struggle of the African National Congress. And the consequence of all of that, eventually at the very tender age of 23, was that I was arrested by the old apartheid security police, detained for quite a long time, severely tortured during my detention at John Foster Square. I always tell people, every morning when I put my hearing aids, and I'm listening to you on those hearing aids because they're linked by Bluetooth to this conversation, every morning when I put it in, I'm reminded of one warrant officer, Nick Dietlefs, who used to give me quite a panel beating during those sessions of interrogation. But what I would like to be remembered for is I fought a good fight, I hope, for liberation in South Africa, and that I'm continuing to be committed to that liberation struggle, because I say it deliberately in the present tense, in the continuation.
Right.
because I don't believe our liberation struggle is over by any means. And I'm one of those who believe what Comrade Oliver Reginald Tambo, the first longest serving president of the African National Congress, who was in exile, said that when you talk about liberation, it is not just the vote, it is also economic liberation. And only once the people of South Africa have full economic liberation will we be able to say that we've achieved the objectives that the African National Congress was formed for in 1912.
So would you, I mean, I'm assuming that everybody agrees that we obtained political liberation in 94. Would you say that, and if you're saying that we still have to fight for economic liberation, why don't you join the EFF? Because that's what they're doing, apparently.
Well, the African National Congress, since its formation in 1912, has been dedicated to not just the political liberation, as you call it, to the achievement of a universal franchise vote. It was also dedicated to full economic liberation. If we go through the documents of the African National Congress, the African claims, the Freedom Charter, the various strategy and tactics documents of the ANC, it is clear that the ANC has always been committed also to economic liberation.
Right.
And I'm a member of the ANC. I'm a very dedicated member of the African National Congress. I always say to my friends and even to my enemies, the only family I have, seeing that I lost to a very large extent my Afrikaans family, is the African National Congress. Now, you know, Solly, amongst families and in families, one argues, one fights, but eventually you get together.
Right.
I'm going through one of those phases where I'm arguing and fighting with some of the leadership of the ANC because I disagree with some of the policy positions that they've taken. I disagree with the manner in which they are dealing with the issue of economic transformation. But that doesn't mean that I'm now suddenly going to run off to the EFF or to any other political party. I'm one of those people, once I'm in a particular organization, once I'm dedicated to a particular movement such as the ANC is, I stick it out. I'm not a person who blows with the wind.
Right.
And as you've heard from my earlier part of my history, I'm also no Johnny come lately. I've been in the ANC for 43 years now. Right. So no one is going to tell me to leave the African National Congress. I will be here whether they like it or not.
So where people like, we'll come back to the ANC because there's so much to say and to ask about the ANC, but I'm still interested in Carl. People like Beyers Nodé, was he like your hero, a hero of yours? And others, of course, there were other Africans, men and women at the time who looked at the National Party and said, this is not what you should be doing, this is wrong. Were they your heroes? Who was your biggest hero in the Afrikaans anti-apartheid community at the time?
The Afrikaans community, I must say, Wembei, as I used to call him. I met Dr. Beyers Nodé in a very interesting way. I was expelled from the Rand Afrikaans University when I was very young, because I put up posters at the university calling for the release of President Nelson Mandela and for the university to be open to all South Africans. For my little trouble to do so, I was expelled from the university. That led to quite a lot of tension among myself and my dad, in my family. Eventually, my dad threw me out of the house. And I was literally, because I was a youngster, I was not well integrated into the liberation struggle community. I just believed that apartheid was wrong and I acted accordingly. So I was literally out on the street without a place to stay, sleeping for almost 2 weeks on park benches, trying to find my way. And then I saw a poster on a lampole at the park where I was. It was from the Sowetan, and it said that Father Simeon Kwane, who was then the dean of the Anglican Church in Johannesburg at St. Mary's Cathedral, was fasting in protest to the evictions of people from informal settlements. I looked at this poster, I said, perhaps this priest will be able to help. So I found my way to St. Mary's Cathedral. I managed to get eventually into Father Simeon Kwane's office. His PA was very confused by this young Afrikaner boy who now insisted on seeing the Dean of Johannesburg.
Right.
But she did allow me to see him. And when I met him, he said to me, young man, I know someone who will understand you better than I do. Come back tomorrow. So I came back the next day, and as I walked into Father Nkwane's office, there was an elderly gentleman looking just like one of my uncles, and in, you know, one of those safari suits with the short pants
Right.
and the socks that you pull up.
I was about to ask, what was he wearing?
He was wearing a safari suit. And
Okay.
that was Dr. Beyers Nadia.
Right.
And my first reaction was, what is this Afrikaner oom going to tell me? But when he opened his mouth and he started speaking, it was wisdom. And when Bey became my mentor, I always say that he became the father to me that my own father could not be.
Oh.
So for many, many years, until he passed on, Wembei was the person that I went to, that I discussed my political views and also my personal issues. He had garden furniture outside in the back garden of his house under a fruit tree.
Right,
and we used to sit outside there and talk for hours. And if there's one person who really changed my life, who shaped my views, who made me committed to the liberation struggle, and who also introduced me to the African National Congress, it was Wim Beyers.
Yeah, but look, Wim Beyers, of course, is a very known figure. There were many other white South Africans, and particularly African South Africans, young men who refused to serve in the South African army, if you can name it, sorry. Young men who refused to serve in the South African army, with the consensus movement. But now we live in a South Africa where the narrative seems to be against all white people. I mean, what do you say to people who say, but guys, you can't throw everybody into the same basket? You know, there were, even during apartheid, there were apparently black people who were caught on the wrong side of the line. There were white people who were caught on the wrong side of the line. What do you say to South Africans today about racial profiling?
What I would say is that we have to acknowledge that there are a few white people, and I'm saying it very deliberately so, that are committed to fundamental change in South Africa, but there are not many. And unfortunately, the white community in South Africa are doing themselves a huge disfavor by not acknowledging how deep the hurt of apartheid went and how fundamental the transformation is that is required. And that transformation
aren't you generalizing? But aren't you generalizing? I mean, sure, why did you say some white people or some members of the white community?
Well, there are a few, as I say to you, but the majority of whites are failing the transformation project in South Africa. They are not committing themselves to fundamental transformation. You know, I was one of the people who led a campaign which was called the Home for All campaign a couple of years ago, where we called on whites to come forward to acknowledge the wrongs of the past and to also agree that there must be restitution. Most of the white community rejected that very simple request that I and a few other people, amongst them also the former president of the Black Sash, Ms. Mary Burton, and others made. You see, the problem that I have is that a large part of the white community think that we can live in this country as if apartheid has never happened.
What is restitution?
And they do not see it. Restitution, what I mean by restitution is that the wrongs of the past have to be corrected. That the return of the land is critical, and that we need to have a return of the land through expropriation of land without compensation. And I know that it's a controversial subject, but it is absolutely critical. We need to get a transfer.
Yeah, but
to
to whom? To government, to individuals? I mean, how do you identify the land that must be forcibly expropriated and given to somebody else, and who gets to benefit? And given your organization, the ANC's a history now since 1994 of giving mostly to its own people, politically connected people, aren't we running the risk of a Zimbabweanification or the Zanupification of this, of taking away and giving it to the comrades in the ANC like they did to the comrades in ZANU-PF?
No, Solly, of course, that is not going to be the program of land restitution, which will be a national government program.
Okay.
And I'm talking here, whether some other people may not like it or not, I'm talking here about nationalization of the land and then making it available for the use of the people who were indeed, in terms of their history, the indigenous people of South Africa to whom this land belonged. And the land was stolen by white colonists. And we have to acknowledge that. And I always say, and it's not a glib phrase, I always say, you don't pay for stolen goods. So a nationalization program of the land to be placed under the control of government and then to be made available for the effective use by the indigenous people of this country, the majority of whom are Black, and specifically African people, is absolutely critical. And if the land issue is not addressed, the rest of the economic transformation that we need to see in South Africa will not succeed, because land lies at the absolute foundation of the economic disempowerment and disenfranchisement of the people of this country historically, and land will be the foundation of the return of economic power to the majority of South Africans.
So are you suggesting that all land that is currently in private hands must be given to the state, and the state, which is currently run by the African National Congress, will, mindful of human rights and the constitution and economy, especially food security, the economy of the country, they would do the right thing to make sure that the country's productivity doesn't go down, and that not only politically blessed people will benefit?
Yes. The short and sweet answer is yes. And then, of course, we need to put the proper processes, the proper mechanisms in place in order to achieve that.
Okay.
But for me, the nationalization of the land is a critical issue, and where the debate really should be for us is not about this issue of nationalization of the land, because that's the only way we're going to return the land to the majority of South Africans, but the mechanisms that we're going to use to avoid exactly the fear that you are expressing, that this may become something where, friends and pals are empowered and the majority of people still stay outside that empowerment program.
Right. But Carl, we're talking as if the ANC is still one united organization. We know that it's not. You and I know that it's not. I mean, everybody is talking about, or maybe from where you said you are regarded, and I want you to tell me later, or if when you respond to this, whether you think South Africa misunderstands Carl Niehaus. All right. The ANC is seen, from where I said, as a largely fractioned or divided alongside two big, the faction that is often regarded as the radical economic transformationist faction, which you are apparently part of, and there's the other one which is often described as progressist, whatever that means. Which ANC agrees with where do you think the ANC will ever agree anyway to take away land as you describe it and do with it as you describe it? How will it get there before while it still even cannot agree on economic policies for the country without internecine fighting within the African National Congress?
Solly, the ANC has an economic policy program. It is a fallacy to say that we don't. And that economic policy program was fine-tuned and adopted at the 54th National Conference of the ANC. And that economic policy program is called Radical Economic Transformation. It is there in the resolutions. I can bring you the documents of that conference and you will see it there. So to talk about a faction, or as if it is a separate grouping, which is radical economic transformation, I reject in its entirety.
Okay.
The real members of the African National Congress who are committed to the historical mission of the ANC and the roots of the African National Congress are those that embrace this official economic policy program of the ANC, which is radical economic transformation. Those who reject it are outside the economic policy program of the ANC. They are people who are not working for the empowerment of the majority of South Africans. I will not call them progressives at all. In fact, what I would call them are reactionaries. I would call them servants of white monopoly capital. I will call them people that are killing the African National Congress and that they are the real factionists. In the ANC, there is only one economic policy program, and that is radical economic transformation, because it was adopted at the National Conference of the ANC. If anyone wants to change that policy program, they must come to the next National Elective Conference of the ANC and change it. But for now, there's only one economic policy program, and that is radical economic transformation.
A lot of the decisions or resolutions taken at ANC conferences, I mean, we see it on TV, it's quite a rowdy environment, and usually we have about 4,000 or so delegates at this event. Do they speak for the Republic of South Africa? I mean, what is everything that's good for the ANC good for South Africa? Do all these resolutions only look at what's good for the ANC, or do they also look at what's good at holding South Africa together, as per the Constitution of the Republic?
The ANC was set up in 1912 as the preeminent liberation movement. So it has a duty, it has a historical task to not just take care of itself, but to take care of the country.
But it hasn't taken care of the country, Carl. Come on.
Wait, Solly. Okay. I'm going to respond to
Okay, sorry.
Now, the challenge for us is to make sure that we continue to live up to those ideals of the founding fathers and mothers of the African National Congress. And those ideals were the full empowerment and liberation of the majority of South Africans that are Black and especially African people. So for me, the challenge is whenever I'm involved in ANC work, is to go to that touchstone, that test. Does it work for the liberation and empowerment of the majority of Black and especially African people? I believe when I look at the historical documents of the ANC, when I look at the Freedom Charter, the African claims, and as I've said, all the various strategy and tactic documents of the ANC, that radical economic transformation is truly the backbone of those policy positions, and that we need to work for that implementation. Now, you're quite right that the ANC is not at this stage a united organization. And unfortunately, there are those that have lost their way, who have turned against this historical mission that the African National Congress has. And I would argue that at the moment, those who are in control of the National Executive Committee of the ANC, and I would even say President Cyril Ramaphosa, find themselves in the group who've lost their way. And we need to change that. That's why, and I know it sounds perhaps radical, but it's not. It is more in terms of commitment for the ANC's future. That's why I've been quite open in saying that the time had come for the current national executive of the ANC and President Cyril Ramaphosa to go. They are failing the ANC and they are failing the historical task of full liberation that the African National Congress has been given.
Do you think the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa is still the supreme law of the country and it should be protected as such by all of us?
Of course, the Constitution is the supreme law, but the Constitution is not a holy writ. It is possible within the provisions of the Constitution to change the Constitution.
Democratically.
And the Constitution, yes, of course, always democratic.
Yes.
And of course, the Constitution was the product of negotiation. I was part of those negotiations, although I was a junior member of the ANC's negotiating team. I know that it was a compromise. I know that there had to be compromises made in order to move us forward and to get us to those first national democratic elections on the 27th of April, 1994. But I do not believe the Constitution is perfect. It is not a holy writ. And there are problems in this Constitution, and we should be prepared to consider changes that will help to empower the majority of South Africans further, and we should be prepared to consider making changes, especially to those clauses in the Constitution that prevent economic empowerment. I have a problem with the way in which the property clauses in the Constitution have been written, because they are actually continuing to perpetuate the old colonial property power relations and dynamics. I have a problem with Section 25 of the Constitution and the way in which it makes it almost impossible to do what I've said earlier is absolutely necessary, and that is to get the land returned to the people through a process of no compensation and proper restitution.
So,
now, these are the things that needs to happen, and if we want to do it, it may be necessary to change the Constitution. But of course, I agree with you. It always has to be done properly, legally, democratically.
well, they tried. It failed democratically because they couldn't gather the numbers, right? So why don't we just move on and find other ways to tackle the same problem? But also, you keep talking about the Black indigenous people. What do you say of the Khoi and the San, or the people who consider themselves to be the First Nations of South Africa? Where do they sit in all of this?
Let me first respond to your earlier remark about not being able to change the Constitution and shouldn't we just move on. I think it would be critical for us to work for a program of African unity amongst all Africans. And there I would include other parties that are representative of African people, not just the African National Congress.
When you say African people, do you mean Black people?
Yes.
So what about you? Are you an African people person?
I am a South African who happen to be white, but who associate myself with the ideals and the program for the empowerment of the majority of Black and especially African indigenous people. So in that way, I am part of that struggle, and I have fully committed myself to that struggle. But this African unity that I talk to is a program that we should push very hard. And I believe if we succeed in doing so, we will eventually also succeed in a democratic way to get the majority of 2/3 in our National Assembly, in our National Parliament, in order to make what I would consider to be important and necessary changes to our Constitution.
What do you say to a young African child who was born, say, 20 years ago or 15 years ago in a poor white family, who would see South Africa as home? Do you say because of what people who look like you did in the past, you can't get A, B, or Z? It's maybe you must go and look for opportunities outside of South Africa?
You are part of South Africa, but you are a person in a historical context who have to understand the historical developments that led to the South Africa that we have today. So as a young white South African or young white Afrikaner,
from a poor family,
yes, okay, poor, you still have to acknowledge that in terms of your whiteness, your community had been privileged. And it is true. And it is true that you therefore have to acknowledge that there has to be transformation, and you can either choose to be part of that transformation program. You can either understand the historical context in which you find yourself, or you can become a reactionary. Hopefully you won't become a reactionary. You will participate in that program and understand your historical roots and context in which you live in this period now of 2022.
Okay, Carl, let's move on a little bit to the Carl of 2022. I mean, of 2020, maybe 2019. In recent years, you have strongly associated yourself with former President Jacob Zuma. Jacob Zuma has been accused of many, many things. Of course, he hasn't been to court for all the reasons that we know. He has always managed not to appear in the courts. Maybe one day he will, maybe he won't. We don't know. But he's also heavily accused of having been at the center of the state capture project. This state capture project, we must talk about the opportunity cost of it, the money that was given to the Guptas, the power that had been vested to Zuma and the president and the ANC electorally. That ended up with the Guptas. An example is the so-called deployment committee of the ANC was. We know, even you can deny it was run by the Guptas. They decided who becomes CEO of what state-owned entity. Zuma allowed that to happen. They even had a hand in the appointment of ministers for South Africa. Why are you so strongly associated with Zuma, given all of these things that we know?
Let me first of all challenge some of the assumptions that you make.
Okay, sure.
Like you say that the deployment committee of the African National Congress was run by the Guptas. This is propaganda. It is not the reality. At the same time, you want to tell me that the Guptas were fully in control of the African National Congress and of South Africa. It is propaganda. It's not true. The Guptas, compared to the large economic powers in South Africa, were like a spaza shop. Compare Johann Rupert, the Oppenheimers, the Menels, and many of the other big, truly big economic empowered families in South Africa with the Guptas, and you realize that the real state capture in South Africa has happened many, many centuries and decades
come on.
ago.
Look, I don't like to interfere to intervene like that. Come on, let's talk about the private sector one side, and let's talk about how those people in the private sector got their wealth. We can have a conversation about that. I'm talking about the access that was given to the Guptas to the public funds, to the public affairs. There are many attempts that are well documented, especially through the Zondo Commission, to interfere, to appoint people in the private sector. They control of our taxes. Forget about the rupee. We can talk about the rupee. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but let's not mix these two.
No, they are absolutely mixed.
Okay.
The private sector's involvement in the South African economy and with the government is one that we can never deny, because if you talk about corruption never just happens inside government.
I know.
There is a corrupter and a corruptee.
No, I agree. I disagree.
No, absolutely. You can disagree with me, but
there are two corrupt parties. One is on one side of the line, the other is on the other side of the line. There are people like Temba Maseko and others. No, Carl. If you agree to do wrong, you're also corrupt. You can't play victim and say, "Oh, this so and so person corrupted me." You are corrupt because you also benefit. There are many whistleblowers who refuse to be corrupted or to be part of the corruption responsibility partnerships. Surely.
Are you going to give me a chance?
Of course. I'm sorry. I'm getting excited,
Thank you.
Carl.
No, it's fine. You can get excited,
okay,
but
go
at
ahead.
the same
Okay.
time,
no, you're
you
right.
have to allow me to make my point. And the point that I'm making is not fundamentally different from the point that you have made so strongly just now.
Okay.
Yes, there is, of course, a responsibility for anyone who allows him or herself to be corrupted. At the same time, there is also the need to deal with those people who are the corruptors. And in many instances, that comes from the private sector. And we cannot concentrate on the one at the cost of the other. And the biggest corruptors in the South African environment have never been, and I'm not trying to do what-if-ism and all of that, or introduce other subjects, but the biggest corruptors in the South African environment have been consistently the big white monopoly capitalist companies. And they have done so in the historical colonial past in South Africa, and they continue to do so. What the Guptas had done, and I am no person who is here to try and have a brief for the Guptas. I've never even met them in my life. I don't know them from above soup. but they did disrupt some of the corrupt activities of big white monopoly companies. And the biggest reason why they became the target was not so much because they were involved in corruption, but because of that disruption that they engaged in within the mining sector, especially, as you know, with regards to the coal mining sector. Brian Molefe speaks very extensively about what was actually happening in the coal mining sector and the evergreen contracts that he was faced with, that he faced in Eskom when he became the CEO of Eskom. And when he tried to change that and make a difference and get rid of some of those big companies, all hell broke loose, because this was now challenging the fundamental foundations on which the South African white monopoly capitalist enterprise is resting in South Africa. And these are the issues that has to be addressed too. Yes, by all means, complain about corrupt activities that may or may not have taken place on the side of the Guptas. But don't come and tell me that the biggest corruptors in South Africa were the Guptas.
No,
come and tell me. No. Don't come and tell me that state capture only started 10 years ago. State capture started many decades and centuries ago in South Africa. And the current State Capture Commission is not giving us a full picture of what truly is state capture. Unfortunately, the current State Capture Commission became a tool for a particular grouping and faction within the African National Congress and for the big white monopoly capitalist companies to get rid of those who they felt were getting in their way. And as such, it was a selective tool, and it was not an honest and true reflection of what state capture in South Africa is. I'm all for dealing with state capture, but I'm not dealing for selective justice. I'm not dealing for a situation where the blindfold gets taken off the eyes of Lady Justice and suddenly she can now target certain people, certain organizations, certain groupings, and others are being left off the hook.
Okay,
That is not justice.
You also need to allow me to speak.
I'm allowing you.
Do you believe in the principle of winners take all and zero-sum games? In other words, forget what was negotiated in 94 or prior to 94. In a marriage, Carl, I don't know if you're married now or any form of relationships, you got people come together and say, we're going to walk a journey together, right? And along the journey, there will be compromises. If you can't have compromises, then don't walk a journey with anybody. So we, the people, the diverse people of South Africa, came together in prior to 94, and the ANC was a big player in that journey. In the end, we ended up with a compromise in the constitution. Everybody knows it's a compromise because nobody won a war against the other parties, right? And we needed to save South Africa from a possible, outbreak of civil war that could have been protracted. So surely you don't, once you've signed those agreements, somewhere down the line, you say, okay, I don't want this marriage anymore. Let's go and rewrite those agreements. Maybe you should just walk away and find another partner, Otherwise, because South Africa will always be a diverse country. Let's face it. There'll not just be one group of South Africans. How do we make South Africa work mindful of the colored people, the Indian people, the San people, the white people, so that it's not just about the black people? Of course, there's got to be a level of development, economic development, enablement that ensures that people, especially those who were disadvantaged through apartheid, of course, get to see that there can be opportunities for them. But that shouldn't be done by saying to the white little child that I explained to you earlier, from poor family, sorry, because of what your people did, you got to pay. You can't get into their job. But surely there's got to be a humane way to build this awesome country of us with so much potential.
Sorry if I was understood to have said that there's no future for the white child that you referred to earlier. I'm misunderstood.
Okay.
I asked of that white child the challenging but not impossible understanding of the environment and the history where we come from.
Right.
With regards to the relationship that we have in South Africa between different communities and the manner in which that was negotiated before 1994, which then eventually led to our final constitution that was adopted. Surely we live in a society that progresses. Surely we also acknowledge that at a particular point, you make compromises because that is what is possible. But it doesn't mean that those compromises necessarily means justice. I will never claim that the Constitution of South Africa that was adopted was a just constitution in terms of addressing the injustices of the past in a proper way. I think I would be entirely wrong to make such a claim. Now, if I say that that is not the case, then surely as time progresses, as you acknowledge, as dynamics change, as things are fluid, one comes to a point where you say some of those injustices that we had to accept because we didn't win a military war against the apartheid regime can now be changed. And it should be possible for us to renegotiate some of those issues. And one of them, as I've referred to you, is the issue of land and the economic injustices that we continue to face in South Africa. So there can be a process of negotiation and change. Change is part of life. That's why I'm against the idea that the Constitution must be as if it is cast in concrete, that it cannot be changed.
Right. Okay.
Those who do so are interested in maintaining the illegitimate, unjust gains that they managed to negotiate in 1994 because the power dynamics were in their favor. They are now trying to say that this constitution is a holy writ because they want to continue to maintain those unjust and illegitimate rights that they managed to get for themselves.
Okay.
In a true democratic society, as the dynamics change, it should be possible to address those injustices and bring justice to the majority of South Africans.
Okay. Before we continue, thank you very much. I know that you have to be somewhere at past. It's about 10 past now. Can we go for another 10, 15 minutes?
Of course. I am sorry that there was a bit of a delay because of the manner in which we fought with the poor data provision system that we have in South Africa.
I always say to people, Carl, that internet connection must be regarded as a basic human right all over the world. It must
I agree with you,
human right.
and I'm very unhappy about the way in which our government, also the ANC, has mismanaged the issue of the availability of data and the availability of proper networks in South Africa. They're too expensive. They are poor.
Yeah.
You can go to many other African countries that we as South Africans are arrogant enough to think that we are better developed. And you go there and you have cheaper data and better connections than we have in South Africa. This is a pathetic failure from the side of our government and of our mobile industry, and it has to be corrected.
Please tell them that when you get into the same place with them, please.
I keep on saying it all the time because I'm not a very patient person, as you must have heard. But I got a little bit irritated when we couldn't get the connection right.
Yeah, I saw that.
I am not patient with people's incompetence. And this is the result of selfish incompetence and people lining their pockets rather than taking care of the majority of South Africans. And I agree with you, data is a right and everyone should have it. And it was emphasized by what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, when poor, mainly Black and African kids were not able to get proper education through distant learning because data is too expensive. And anyhow, it's not available in many of the townships where they live.
Carl, let's go back to the discussion about, so just to be clear, are you saying the Guptas and Zuma should be left alone. That's why, and you're proudly associated with Zuma. Is it what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that anyone should be left alone. I think
Okay.
there should be
Okay.
proper investigations, but I also think that justice should be blind.
Right.
And I have followed the manner in which President Zuma has been treated right from the beginning for more than 22 years. I think I'm one of the few people who can say that I've attended every legal court appearance of President Zuma since he was first charged. I'm sure you recall that even that time that you referred to earlier when we met, this was one of the topics of discussion, that we referred to how President Zuma gets treated. President Zuma has been treated in an unfair manner because of selective justice, and he has been specifically targeted for reasons that I don't believe are because of so-called or alleged criminal actions that he had undertaken, but because he has been targeted for political reasons. And I am against that. I'm not against President Zuma getting his proper day in court, but I am against the political manipulation of the legal system. I have raised it from the first day that I saw it happening, and I will continue to raise it every time that I see it happening, whether it's with regards to him, whether it's regards to Comrade Ace Magashule, whether it's regards to Bongani Bongo, and even to myself. I'm now being arraigned in court for issues that have got nothing to do with anything else but political targeting, because there are those who do not like the political positions that I take.
Did you see the riots that happened last year coming? I mean, did you know that there were individuals planning these riots soon after the former president Zuma was arrested? And did you know that they were coming?
No, I did not know that there were any individuals planning so-called upheaval or unrest. I could see that we are in a tinderbox. I could see that there are socio-economic reasons why an uprising and violence could erupt. I warned about it. I'm extensively warning about it in a press conference that I held outside the gates of Nkandla on the 8th of July. And if you go back to what I said there, you will understand the circumstances and the context in which I expressed my concern. But I'm not one of those who believe that there was a small group of conspirators somewhere in a little back room planning this revolt or unrest. It was an outbreak of an upheaval of unrest because of the socio-economic circumstances that we are faced with. And part of the spark that led to that was because of the arrest of President Zuma, not because there were people who were coordinating, but because there are South Africans who look at President Zuma and see him as a symbol of hope. And when he was arrested, when that whole unfair, I believe, unconstitutional set of actions were taking place against him, it led to them beginning to feel they lose hope. They became frustrated, and it led to the situation that we had seen. But President Ramaphosa was wrong to refer to this as a coordinated and planned revolt. It never was that. And the subsequent hearings that took place that looked into what happened confirmed that those of us who said that his assessment at that time about it was wrong were right.
So, I mean, the Constitutional Court ruled, I think, recently that Zuma must go back to jail. Do you think that Zuma must go back to jail because the law says, the criminal justice system says so? And also, suppose people were, okay, maybe the previous riots were not coordinated. Suppose it were to come to your attention that people are planning another similar riot. Suppose if Zuma were to be arrested, would you report them to the police?
Let me first of all deal with your issue on whether the Constitutional Court said President Zuma had to go back to jail. President Zuma is currently under medical parole. The issue of medical parole is still a matter in the courts. So he is doing what the court determined and what in the structures of the Department of Correctional Services, I believe was correctly possible to give him the possibility of medical parole, and which was granted to him. I do not believe that President Zuma received justice. I don't believe that the Constitutional Court process that led to him being sentenced to 15 months of imprisonment was correct. And I've explained that. I don't believe there was a proper court hearing. I believe that he was sentenced without proper and due legal process. But despite that, and I think this needs to be emphasized, President Zuma had taken the decision that he was going to hand himself over to the court and to the prison. He went to escort prison himself and handed himself over. So while he was raising his concerns, at the same time, he was not refusing to go to prison, although he continues to say, I will use whatever legal avenue I have available to myself to challenge that judgment and to try and turn it around. And that is the correct way of doing things. Now, I don't know of anyone who is in a conspiratorial way planning for unrest, but I can tell you, and I say this again, as I've said before, the South African environment is a deeply unequal environment. The poverty that the majority of people in South Africa are suffering are unacceptable. The dynamics of that situation creates for us an inherently unstable and dangerous environment. And we need to address that. Rather than trying to use police enforcement, trying to use as much force as possible, we should attend to the issue of economic justice. And economic justice can only be achieved, and sorry, I can see you becoming a little bit uncomfortable. You want to
No.
You're shifting in your
I don't want to lose you.
Economic justice, sorry, has to be fundamental transformation of this economy. It's not going to be trickle-down theories. It's not going to be neoliberal economic policies. It is not just going to be investment conferences where you cheer along investments that people have anyhow many eons ago decided to invest, and now you want to present it as new investment. You know exactly what I'm referring to. So this recent investment conference, which was a fallacious event.
Listen, Carl, I'm enjoying this conversation with you. I'm just, if I seem to be getting edgy, it's because I have so much to talk to you about. I don't want to lose you.
Let's continue talking.
So, earlier on in this conversation, you mentioned that the ANC, or the part of the ANC that you are comfortable, you are with or aligned with, is not happy with the current National Executive Committee of the ANC. And I understood you to be saying you guys obviously have an elective conference coming up end of this year. Maybe there are plans to defeat Ramaphosa so that the right people come back and revive the ANC as you understand it, right? Now, in that case, suppose that were to be a successful intra-party project to vote and get somebody else. Do you see in the future ANC people like Magashule in there and others who have been discredited through state capture, corruption, and other forms of corruption?
Well, first of all, Magashule has not been discredited through even the current very limited and flawed state capture commission.
So do you see
He's hardly mentioned it. He was also not even called to appear in front of that commission. The only thing that Comrade Magashule had to face was what I call trumped up charges on a so-called oversight charge that was brought against him, which is falling apart. There's not even a single witness that the state can present in his case. We will wait to hear what the judge finally decides in the application that he made for that case to be thrown out of court. But I would say that he has an extremely strong case to get that to be done. And why not having Comrade Ace Magashule as one of the leaders of the African National Congress leading the ANC. Why not? Because there's been propaganda against him, because some Afrikaans gentleman decided to write a fictional book called Mafia State or whatever, and try to call Comrade Ace Magashule a mafia. Let us deal with the reality.
Okay.
Let us deal with also democratic processes, and if the majority of ANC members through proper democratic processes, where the ANC branches are properly engaged, where the structures are honored, where there's not brown envelopes making the rounds, where there's not R1 billion being used to buy a presidency and buy positions for certain people on the National Executive Committee, if there's a majority decision in a proper democratic way by the delegates of the ANC at the next National Elective Conference of the ANC to put Comrade Ace Magashule and others in top leadership positions, why not?
Okay.
Surely they deserve to be there if they are elected and they are representatives of the people. Remember, a leader is never someone who just represents himself or presents himself. A leader must come through the people, from the people, in the service of the people. Our current leadership are not that. They bought their positions with brown envelopes.
Including David Mabuza. But anyway, I have an interesting question for you about David Mabuza. But before we go there, I have I don't know what year you left school, Carl. Me, I left it many years ago. It's a multiple it's a multiple choice question, the next one.
I left school in 1978. I'm old. Eh?
Okay, I left.
And when did you leave school?
In 1986.
Ah, you're a spring chicken.
Yeah, you know, it's all in the head of the beholder.
Become grayer than me. How did you manage that?
You have no idea. Since about 31, my hair has been getting grayer and grayer and grayer. It's really gray right now. I keep cutting it, coloring it. I have never done a chisco, bro. I don't think I have the right head for it.
I want to tell you quickly a very funny story.
Okay.
Comrade Thabo Mbeki's father, Comrade Govan, he turned gray very early in his life, but no one knew because he used to color the hair. Né? So he was detained together with the rest of the Rivonia trialists. And they say one morning, Comrade Walter comes into the cell. They were kept separate, so they didn't see each other all the time. And he says to the other comrades, "We've got a serious problem. Something horrible has happened to Govan. Govan has aged overnight. He's gray, man." So, of course, what happened was he couldn't get color, that hair color in detention, so the hair became gray. So I don't know, Solly, are you really gray, or have you decided just to look like an elderly gentleman and peroxide those hair?
You know, I love that question because when people ask me that question, they're actually saying, Solly, that gray hair doesn't suit you. But it's actually really
great. I'm giving you a backhand compliment. I'm telling you, that you're actually looking quite well for your age.
Thank you. Okay, I didn't like the for your age part. Just so you look well, okay, and stop there.
But you see, I'm trying to flatter you, not to ask me difficult questions.
It's working.
But let's proceed with the question.
2 questions. Yes, a multiple choice.
Multiple choice.
Carl Niehaus loves A, South Africa more, B, the ANC more.
It's a false equation because the African National Congress has been set up.
I'm asking you.
South Africa.
Who do you love first, South Africa or the ANC?
I love both because the ANC serves South Africa.
So the one doesn't come before the other, and one must never come before the other. Is that what you're saying?
Of course, the country has always been there. The ANC has been there to serve the country. I love the ANC because it has to serve the people of this country. The day the ANC fails to serve the people, I will have a serious problem with the ANC. And that's why I have a serious problem with the current leadership of the ANC, because they're not serving the people, and therefore they are not serving South Africa.
Okay. We'll go with that. Now, here's my other question. It's you smart, man. That's a problem with people like you.
You will never corner me with a multiple question, Solly. Don't
Yeah,
even
you
try.
slipped yourself out. You wiggled yourself
No,
out very
I'm
quickly.
giving you an honest. No, no.
That's
The
fine.
reality is, I've given you an honest answer, a
I,
true honest answer.
yeah, that's why I said let's go with that one. Here's my
Okay,
other
thank you.
question. So, Carl, it's been said, going back to the 2017 elections, ANC elections, when Ramaphosa became president of the party and Mabuza became deputy president of the party. Now, Mabuza, prior to that, had been reported to be part of the Premier League. He was close to Magashule and was it the other gentleman from the Northwest, and Zuma. The three of them were aligned, were seen, at least reported to be aligned together. And suddenly this man appears on the Ramaphosa side. And it was also reported soon after those elections that Ramaphosa won because of Mabuza. Mabuza gave him the votes that could have gone to Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. I've never seen the RET faction angry at Mabuza. How come? Why? I mean, if this guy betrayed you in the last minute, not even a peep. Nobody have ever said, we're gonna get you. You stole a vote and gave it to Ramaphosa. Is there a deal between? Is it a sleeper for the RET faction in the current administration? Are you guys? Is there like a deal between you guys and Mabuza? What's going on there? Why are you not angry at him?
Sorry, one of my friends said to me, I doubt whether you, meaning me, are really a politician because you are too honest.
Right.
So my answer to you is going to be, I hope that Comrade Didi Mabuza can sleep at night. I hope he can live with himself. Because my view is that he betrayed us. And I've said so before, so if you haven't heard that view from me, perhaps you didn't hear me speaking out loud enough, because I did. Now, perhaps he can still vindicate himself in the upcoming conference, because he's got a lot of wrong to make right. He's got a lot of wrong to make right. Part of the consequences of what we are faced with today and the betrayal of the ANC lies at his doorstep because of what he did at the 54th National Conference of the ANC in the last hours when that election took place. So there's my straight answer. It's perhaps not very political, but I hope it's honest.
So do you see him as a potential future president of South Africa? And if yes, because usually in the tradition, at least the practice of the African National Congress, the deputy becomes president. Up to now, the deputy becomes president. He's the deputy. He's lying low. He's not making a lot of noise. He doesn't make too many controversial statements. And your people, apart from what you just said, and when I say your people, I mean the RET side of the Zuma aligned part of the African National Congress, has not really made a lot of noise against him. So is he like going to be the guy who's going to say, okay, guys, come on, we're all brothers and sisters, let's work together. I'm the next guy here, I'll work for you. And will you believe him if he says that? Will you support him to be able to be there?
My answer is the following. Let the people in the African National Congress, the members in the branches, decide. In the process of them deciding, let them remember what Comrade Didi Mabuza did at the 54th National Conference.
Okay, so
if they calculate that in, we will see. I'm leaving it up to them to decide how that history should impact on their decision.
Okay, whom would you support to replace Ramaphosa?
I'm not going to give you a name, not because I'm trying to wriggle myself out of a difficult question, but because I would be not proper in terms of my own understanding and belief about how the democratic processes in the ANC has to function.
Right.
The ANC leaders will obviously consider their own positions, but ultimately they will have to consider the decisions of the branches of the ANC and those delegates who get sent by the branches to the conference. So at this stage, it will be for me entirely wrong and unprocedural to try and give you a name of who I think should emerge. But what I can say, sorry, is it should not be Cyril Ramaphosa.
Okay.
He is not going to serve the interests of the African National Congress as a liberation movement. And to come back to your question, that multiple answer question that you gave me earlier, because he will not serve the ANC, he will not serve the country. And the country will be a failed nation under a continuation of a presidency by Cyril Ramaphosa.
Okay, thank you. My last question to you is, do you feel misunderstood either by the ANC or your old comrades? That's part one of it. Part two of it is there anything that you would have wanted me to ask you that I didn't ask you?
Yes, I do feel sometimes misunderstood, because I think there are people who try to say that I've changed, who say that the Carl who was part of the African National Congress in the 1990s and who was spokesperson of President Nelson Mandela and of the African National Congress is not the Carl of today. That is not true. I think the people misunderstood who I was then if they have a problem with who I am now, because I'm exactly still the same person. I am still committed to the same ideals. I did not join the African National Congress in June 1979 on a little hill outside Gaborone to see a continuation of white monopoly capitalism and the continuing exploitation of the majority of Black and especially African people.
Right.
I didn't join the ANC for that. I didn't join the ANC for South Africa to be the most unequal society in the world. So that is what I want people to understand. So I am still the same person. And if I'm misunderstood that I'm not, then I would like to get that misconception to be understood and to be corrected. The question that I wanted you to ask is, why did the Nguni Council decide to rename and call me Mpangazita? You didn't ask me that question.
I didn't know. When did that happen, Carl?
About 2-3 weeks ago, the Nguni Council said, we want to honor you for your long-standing commitment to the liberation struggle. We want to name you after what has been many of the warriors and warrior kings of the Nguni people. What they've been called Mpangazita. Now, Mpangazita has got many different nuances of translation, but amongst it, it is planner, but also he who eats his enemy.
God, Carl, you eat your enemies?
Well, one thing I can assure you is I never cower. I do not run away. I state my case. I will continue to fight. So if you ask me why I'm called that name, because I will not sell out. I will continue to fight.
Do you think the South African, and this is my really final question, do you think the South African Reserve Bank should be nationalized? And if so, to what benefit?
Absolutely. And you know, it's not even a radical thing to nationalize the South African Reserve Bank, sorry, because the Reserve Bank in the United States of America, the central bank, the central bank in the United Kingdom, in Canada, all of those banks are nationalized. It is an anomaly that we have in South Africa that there are private shareholders who are able to be shareholders and who are able to have a say in the South African Reserve Bank. It is part of our national pride. It is important that the Reserve Bank should be in full control of our government and of our state. And anyhow, while we're talking about it, the Reserve Bank should not just be an inflation targeting tool. It should also be a tool for growth. It should be a tool for economic development. And That is part of the reason why there are those who are currently still private owners of shares in the Reserve Bank who want to hold on to it because they want to prevent the Reserve Bank from being turned into a tool of true economic development and empowerment in South Africa. So yes, it must be nationalized. They must listen also to what the Prime Minister of Canada said when the Reserve Bank in Canada was nationalized. He said, without the nationalization of the Reserve Bank, how can we have pride in ourselves as a nation? I ask the same question of South Africa.
And you have managed to, especially the side of the ANC where you are at. I know that you've really brought in, explained some things in your perspective. Of course, not everybody is going to agree with you, but that's okay. That's how it goes, right? At least you have had an opportunity to even tell us about your new name, and I enjoyed that.
Thanks, Solly, and thanks for the opportunity. And God bless.
Thank you. Have a nice day further.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. To our viewers out there, my name is Solly Mweng again. You've been watching me in a conversation, sometimes heated, with Carl Niehaus, who's the former ambassador of South Africa to the Netherlands, spokesperson for the African National Congress, Nelson Mandela. He has been an activist since a young age. He was also a young participant in the negotiations that led to a new dispensation. Thank you for having come this far in this conversation. I really hope that you continue watching us and that you share WorldView, the #1 media company where we explore everyone's perspectives on things that will broaden our own worldview. Thank you very much.